So we're back, and now I'm going to go ahead and just clear this entire canvas real quick, and I'm just going to go to Project, New Project, and that's going to say, do we want to save our changes? And no. So now we've got a new blank canvas, and I'll just turn on the background briefly so that we actually have something going on back there for Maxwell to render. And I want to talk for a moment about picture lights. Now that's this fourth button over here that you see. Now this is very special. These are real lights. Well, for the most part. They're not all real lights. Some of them are synthetics that have been arranged in interesting arrays. But generally speaking, these are much more interesting than what you would want to manually create using these controls down here. However, they have a lot less controls available to them. So I'll just go ahead and grab the first one, which is this zebra, and I'll say select. And instantly you'll see that we do have our latitude, longitude, width, height, and rotation. So we can have some of the same basic control here. However, you'll notice that we only have three buttons. We have solid, dark, and half, like we had before, but the rest of them are gone. And we have our wattage and our opacity, but we don't have any of the other settings that we would work with as far as our fall off and our bulb placement. And the reason why is because these are more or less fixed as far as that's concerned. And of course, we can colorize. Now, in order to colorize, you need to enable it by clicking this check mark here, and then you can set this for whatever color you like. However, we're not going to worry about that for right now. Since I have something in the canvas, I'm just going to go ahead and turn off the background so that you can see that this has an impact as far as the shape and the reflections go. Now right now it's kind of small, so maybe we want to boost this up to something like, say, 50 by 50, and that way we can see a bigger impact of this maybe over here. There we go. So if you let this render for just a second, you'll begin to see that we have just a little tiny bit of hint of these stripes in our render. And this just gives us a little bit more interest than having just a standard synthetic square. Now, bear in mind that this is probably a synthetic as well, just been modified so you can see the pattern. I've clicked on this change light source so that we can go in here and we can manually change. It says it's 24 stripes. We also have 20 stripes, 16 stripes, 12 stripes, and 8 stripes. So if we choose 8 stripes and we hit select, it'll take all that same information, the width and height that we changed, as well as the latitude and longitude, and it will just give us that image in its position. So this way we can see those stripes a little bit more clearly even yet, which if you're looking for the stripy look, that's definitely a way to get it, is to have less stripes and have them be bigger. But let's go ahead and look at some of these others. We have window gobos, and these will just give us more window-like reflections. So I'll just grab this one and hit select, and you can see that we end up with something that looks a little bit more like a window type reflection. And of course, this will depend largely on where it is, as well as to what type of reflections you get. Now, in addition to that, we also have tube arrays. Now, these are going to be real tubes. And I think maybe for this one, I'll probably do tube array 07. I like this for just sort of a general background lighting. This doesn't give as strong of a light because it's spread out over all these little lights, and it just doesn't have the same pixel value. However, what is nice about this is it does give a very nice, interesting sort of just variation in our reflections that just gives it just a touch more believability and realism, especially for something like a car paint. Now, below that we have spot arrays, and these would be, again, real lights. These would be spotlights. And you can use whatever you like here. You see we got circular ones. I think maybe the spot array 05 will work just fine for what we're looking for. And again, this is just going to give us a slightly different impact. Now, again, because we're dealing with so much black space in this, we might need to pump up the wattage to something like, say, 2000 in order to see the same intensity of light as we saw before. But the difference, again, is not so much in the intensity light. This isn't the best way of getting a super intense light, but what it does do is give you a lot more interest in your reflections, because now we've got all these various lights that are giving us something that's a lot more interesting than just a solid white square shape. Now below that, you'll see that we have soft lights, and these are basically variations that you might be able to achieve using the synthetics. They're just maybe a little bit easier. And then we have softbox reflections. Now these are softboxes with a reflection, and these would be best used at something like the horizon. So I'm just going to hit select, and we'll move this down to the horizon like so. And you can see that now we have a reflection below the horizon, and we have the softbox on the horizon. And of course, this is definitely something that you would see used quite a bit in photography. Maybe I'll move this guy over like so. and we're going to get a very different lighting effect. Again, these softboxes are very nice for soft, sort of ambient light fill. You can see how nice that is. I like the softboxes. Now let's go over here and look down below. We have showroom glazing. Now this, of course, is definitely useful for automotive, and this is meant to mimic showroom glazing that you would see in an automotive showroom. So I'm going to hit select on this last one, and I'm going to put this one all the way at the top. And this would be a really good use for this one, is to use it. Now, of course, remember that we have our wattage set really high, and for something like this that has a lot of white in it, we're probably going to want to use a much lower wattage in order to get more realistic values. Yeah, that's going to look a lot better. So, and that might even be a little strong. So bear in mind that these wattage values are not absolute as far as these picture lights are concerned. They're going to vary depending upon what the percentage of white to black it is. If you have a lot of black, then you're going to need much higher wattage. If you have a lot of white, then a lower wattage is going to give you. Now see how nice those reflections are in that automotive paint finish? That's just a really nice thing to have for your upper lighting for whenever you're doing an automotive type render. Now, below those, we have rounded, and these again are sort of like the synthetics in a way, but maybe a little bit easier to get than the synthetics might be. And then we have real windows. Now, the real windows are exactly what they sound like. They're real windows. I think my personal favorite happens to be this Velux blind closed. We'll hit select on that one, and we'll put that one, somewhere that makes a little bit more sense, maybe on the horizon. And you can see that we're actually going to get a reflection of that window in our automotive finish. Now, that might not make an awful lot of sense in an automotive render like this, but there may be places where this would make sense. And of course, this would be something that would be a lot clearer when we look at some of the other options. Below that, we have spotlights. And now these are probably the most useful thing in this entire list. We have our sort of cinematic spotlights, and then we have some of the spot with a Fresnel effect, a long bulb with barn doors, and a round bulb with metal reflector. I'm going to go ahead and use the round bulb with metal reflector. We'll put that in there, and you'll see immediately how nicely that creates a very realistic photographic type of effect in our reflections. Now, in this particular instance, we probably don't want to have this to be so huge. Maybe something like 25 by 25. It's going to give us a much better, more realistic look. And of course, this is all about reflections. When we're dealing with these reflective finishes, the interest of these picture lights is going to be in what they give you for your reflections, because the synthetics are going to light things more or less as well. The picture lights are going to give you much more interesting reflections. Now, in addition to that, we have down here, we have a multitude of soft boxes. And again, these are going to be about creating interest in your reflections. So I'll just hit select on this guy. And again, we're going to see, a very nice soft look. We might want to increase the wattage if we want a stronger look, but softboxes are generally considered to be more of an ambient fill light type of thing. And in this particular instance, I might use something like this for the bottom, just to give us a little bit of light at the base and kind of fill up the base, but not be too super strong. In addition to these types of softboxes, which have some flaws in them, some hanging fabric and whatnot, we also have perfect softboxes, and this is basically the exact same thing. They've just cleaned out all of that hanging fabric that you see in stuff like this and just made it perfectly smooth. And then we have overhead boxes, and this would be not all that dissimilar from our showroom glazing right here, just a little bit of a different kind of feel, maybe larger, blocky kind of feel. And of course, this again would be something that you would see a lot in product renders like so. Gives a nice, soft feeling, interesting reflections because of those creases. Just something that you might want to use. Below that, we have another thing that's really interesting, which is the guide lights. Now, these are not something that I would use to light with. These are something that I would use to try to figure out where exactly your light source is. And particularly, I like this last one. This is going to give us sort of a target symbol. So I hit select on this. And what you'll see is we can kind of figure out exactly where our reflections are coming in by simply rendering this guy. And I'll render this guy with some big power because there's a lot of black in this. There we go. Maybe even more power. Maybe 1,000. Don't want to get too crazy with this. So this will give us sort of a means of figuring out exactly where it is that our light is hitting this object in terms of the reflections. And of course, if we let this render for quite some time, you can begin to see that there's a white line here. And that white line is that white line on the cross. So if we let this render long enough, you'll see the rest of that crosshairs apply. And you can see it hitting there, and you can also see it hitting a little bit back here and a little bit right here. So this placement is going to be hitting these spots, and that's just sometimes a useful tool for finding where that is hitting. And that's what those guide lights are all about. Then the fast blurs. These are really cool for automotive, and you can see we have a lot of fast blurs, and some of them are kind of shaped like cars. I think probably my favorite fast blur is this one right here. And these will really work, I think, probably even better up high. They just give kind of an exciting motion to your reflections that are a little bit more interesting than your standard sort of boxy looking light scenarios. This is something that I think just gives a little bit more dynamics and movement to your renders and can be a nice touch. And then below that, we have ceiling grids, and these would basically be just soft boxes that are arranged in a ceiling grid type pattern, like so. And they can be useful for that purpose. And blur spots. These are basically your spotlights, but they have been blurred in such a way as to create a softer reflection that maybe doesn't have all the details. In case you have too many details coming through with your regular spotlights, you can change them to the blur spots here. You can see that we have this guy here. Probably, I think this would be a particularly good one for the blur spot. Like that. And of course, if these are really strong, by the way, this has 1,000 wattage. If these are really strong, then you may find the blur spot is just going to give you a little bit better look because it's softer than your regular spotlights. And then finally, we have our light arrays. Now, these are various different light arrays that are just kind of odd shapes that you might find useful for reflection purposes. This one you see an awful lot in portrait photography. This just gives us kind of an interesting circular reflection that you might, if you look really carefully at portrait photography, you'll see a lot at times in people's eyes. You can begin to see that circle and this reflection right here. And of course, if you mix that with some of these other lightings, you might find that that gives you just that interesting reflection, a little bit more life and interest in your reflections. So that's the picture lights in a nutshell. And now we're going to go ahead and look at our background settings in the next video.